Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of Backfired, an NBA history podcast about bad teams, bad luck, and bad decisions. My name is Lewis, and today the intro music comes in just a minute because I'm going to explain what this episode is going to be and how it's different from the norm. So I've been brainstorming a different style of podcast, and this is going to be a pilot version of that. I have been trying to decide between doing this new idea in podcast form or in newsletter form, possibly both. I've prepared both for this week. So let me tell you what it's going to be. So when I was originally coming up with the idea for Backfired, I thought about doing what I'm doing today, which is an NBA radio show that is set in the 1990s, but being recorded in the present day, presented as if it's just a broadcast that took place in the 90s, like a time capsule kind of thing. I also, eventually I want to be a writer. I want to be a published author about NBA history. That's a goal that I've had for myself for a while now. So I've prepared a newsletter that covers the same events that the quote-unquote radio broadcast is going to cover, which is the end of the conference finals in 1990. So the Portland Trail Blazers beat the Phoenix Suns in the West in 6 games, and the Detroit Pistons beat the Chicago Bulls in the East in 7 games. And it's just a radio broadcast and newsletter covering the games over that previous weekend, previewing the finals between the Blazers and the Pistons, talking about NBA lottery reform, and then there's a gag segment in there that I think is very funny. I really want this to be a good product, so I desperately want to hear some feedback from the listeners. There's a good amount of y'all, so I'm hoping that I hear back from you in my Instagram or my Twitter, TikTok DMs. That's at Backfired NBA Pod, or I will just leave room for feedback as the question on Spotify if you're listening on there. I'm going to read all of it. Tell me, please, what you like, what you don't like about this episode specifically. And the newsletter, which there's a link to it in the description of this episode. It's about 4 pages long. Let me know what you think about that as well if you take a look at it. Please do. I went ahead and set up a Google Voice number, by the way, to take voicemails. So that the phone number on the graphic for this episode, mentioned in the episode, written in the newsletter, that's a real phone number. If I decide to continue doing this version of the pod, I will use voicemails left at that number as content. If nobody calls in, I will write my own questions and have my friends call in, but hoping to get some audience participation on there and really make it like an authentic 90s radio show with call-ins and things like that. But anyway, that's what's going on. Imagine you're in your car or you're at home. It's a Monday morning. It's 8 a.m., June 4th, 1990, and you're listening to the radio, tuning that dial up and down, looking for KLTB radio.
What happened to your kitty?
He fell off his trike.
The affordable, transportable cellular telephone. Only at Radio Shack.
My music hits me so hard, makes me say, oh my Lord, thank you.
KLTB 101.4 Talkin Hoops, Oklahoma City's best and only NBA radio program. Hosted by Lewis Pipkin and Dale. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the Loop Host, where I'm sorry, that is the old intros. Sorry about that, y'all. Force a habit. Welcome to KLTB Radio's Talkin Hoops, Oklahoma City's best and only NBA radio program. Today is Monday, June the 4th, and I'm so happy that you're here with us this morning on KLTB 101.4 FM. It's just me in the studio today. Dale is recovering from that dental surgery on Thursday that we mentioned on last week's broadcast. It's an experimental procedure where they've pulled all of his teeth, cleaned them, and then reattached them to the gums. Supposed to make you not need another dental cleaning for 2 years or so, but we are pleased to announce that this week's broadcast is sponsored by AOK Dental and Orthodontics. Dr. Albert was voted Oklahoma City's most innovative dentist 4 years in a row by the readers of the Oklahoman. If you're tired of the same old dental experience, go set up an appointment with Dr. Albert's office today. Get experimental with your dental. And as always, we thank Dr. Albert for his continued support of KLTB 101.4 FM. But we have got a packed show for you today. We're going to go over the upcoming NBA Finals matchup that was decided last night, and then we'll go over the NBA Draft Lottery. There's a new system in place with weighted odds based on team record. I'll tell you all about that. And we'll see if we got any voice messages on the answering machine. I see that red light blinking. That means we got at least one. And then, of course, Oklahoma City's favorite segment, Sonic's Corner. So let's get into the NBA Finals. We'll start out west since that game happened on Thursday night, not last night. The Portland Trail Blazers have made the NBA Finals for the first time since 1977 when they won the championship against the Philadelphia 76ers. That was that Bill Walton, Maurice Lucas, Lionel Hollins, all those guys, exceptionally young championship team, the youngest that we've ever had. But Portland looks a lot different nowadays. They're a little bit older than that team was. They've got Terry Porter in his 5th season, Clyde Drexler in his 7th, Kevin Duckworth in the middle. He's the young man in that starting lineup at 25 years of age. Jerome Kersey in his 6th year at the quick forward, and then Big Buck Williams in his 9th year. And you know he is happy to be in Portland after losing all those games in New Jersey the past few years. And they defeated the Phoenix Suns, the returning team from last year's Western Conference Finals, where they were swept by Magic and Kareem and the Lakers last year. But this year, they were far more competitive. They actually almost won this game on Thursday night, but Portland's execution down the stretch was masterful. So to recap a little bit, I know we talked a little bit about this last week, but the Blazers won games 1 and 2 in Portland. The Suns then came back and won games 3 and 4 in Phoenix, kind of what you'd expect. But actually, if you look at the numbers, Portland won those first 2 games by a total of 3 points. Phoenix won their 2 games in Phoenix by a total of 46 points. So common sense dictates, hey, this series might not be as easy for Portland as everybody, myself included, is saying it's going to be. I know I was beating the drum on Portland in 5, but this Suns team has taken down 2 teams with better records than them already in this playoffs. Including the Lakers, who have got the MVP from 3 of the last 4 years, and James Worthy, Byron Scott, everybody except for Kareem, it seems, in tow. So Phoenix has been doing very well for themselves in this playoffs, but Portland is just the team to beat in the West right now, regardless of whether they win the NBA Finals this year or not. That's going to be the case, next year as well. I just don't see anybody taking them down. Although David Robinson, that star rookie for the Spurs, he gave him some fits in that second round matchup, and the Spurs did almost defeat the Blazers in that matchup. Now in Game 6 on Thursday night, Portland was the more composed team down the stretch, in no small part due to the injury sustained in the second quarter by Suns point guard Kevin Johnson. He limped into the locker room with an apparent hamstring injury in the second quarter. He was unable to return to the game, which thrust Jeff Hornacek into the point guard position for the remainder of the game. And Hornacek did really, really well. He scored 36 points, which was a playoff career high. He hit all 14 of his free throws, added 6 assists and 4 steals. I mean, he did a little bit of everything on Thursday night, and he played admirably. But in the final seconds, with Portland up by just 1 point, 110-109, the Suns' Cotton Fitzsimmons drew up a play that involved Tom Chambers driving to the basket. And the ball was stolen by Buck Williams on Portland, and Williams was smart enough to get the ball out of his hands as a 65% free throw shooter, get it into the hands of Clyde Drexler, a 77% foul shooter. Of course, the only better option on the team would have been to get it to Terry Porter, but Drexler hit both free throws, and that set up a final shot for Phoenix, down 3. And the hero of that night, Jeff Hornacek, launched a 3-pointer just before the buzzer, but it missed. And that destroyed the growing narrative that Portland, had lost 5 straight road games to San Antonio and Phoenix and, wouldn't be able to win on the road in Phoenix that night. And that win gave the Portland Trail Blazers a little time to rest and recover while the Detroit Pistons and the Chicago Bulls settled their series. So final stats from that game, the victors, Portland, 112-109. Clyde Drexler and Terry Porter each had 23 points and 7 assists. All 5 starters scored in double figures. 3 starters, Drexler, Buck Williams, and Jerome Kersey, each had double-doubles with 10 or more rebounds. Drazen Petrovic was the high scorer off the bench for the Blazers with 11 points on 5 of 7 shooting in just 9 minutes. 11 points in 9 minutes. That's pretty good. And for the Suns, Jeff Hornacek was the high scorer, 36 points on 11 of 22 shooting. Kurt Rambis, a game-high 12 rebounds. And Horny and Kevin Johnson were tied with 6 assists, and Dan Marley poured in 22 off the bench. So now let's head over to Game 7 at the Palace in Auburn Hills. That one was a high-stakes matchup, the 3rd consecutive year that the Pistons and the Bulls have met in the playoffs. Each of the last 2 times the Pistons were victorious, victorious over the Bulls. In 1988, the Pistons won in 5 games in the conference semifinals. Last year, the Pistons won in 6 games in the conference finals. And they were looking for history to repeat itself a little bit this time, but the Bulls were able to pull off a Game 6 victory and force a winner-take-all Game 7 in Detroit on Sunday night. Michael Jordan scored 18 third-quarter points on Friday night in Game 6, and 18 was the margin of victory in Game 6. But not to be outdone, the Detroit Pistons won Game 7 last night by 19 points. And if you watch that game, you know that is being generous. It was not that close. Michael Jordan was the only Chicago Bull to do basically anything positive of note. The game plan was to keep the game within striking distance through the first 3 quarters and then just let Michael Jordan take over in the 4th quarter. And to Phil Jackson's credit, it was a 10-point game heading into the 4th that I think he would consider striking distance, but the Pistons dominated the 2nd and 4th quarters. Neither team started off the game particularly well. Chicago led 19-17 after the 1st quarter, but Detroit in the 2nd quarter outscored the Bulls by 17 points. And by the final 4 minutes of the game, the Bulls had waved the white flag. Jordan finished with 31 points, 8 rebounds, and 9 assists. He had the bulk of the team's made baskets and assists. I don't know if, this guy would have made up 19 points of deficit, but the absence of John Paxson out with the ankle injury certainly did not help the Chicago Bulls. Now, before we get to the Pistons, who won this game in this series and really deserve more credit than the Chicago Bulls get blame, I will mention that this was a really, really uncharacteristically bad performance for several Bulls players. Scottie Pippen scored only 1 made basket. He was 1 for 10 for 2 points. Horace Grant shot 3 of 17. I don't have to tell you, for a big man, that is abysmal. Craig Hodges, the 3-point champion at this year's All-Star game, he was 2 for 12 from 3. Now, I will admit, on the Hodges front, he was a little bit out of his depth starting for the Bulls for the first time all season. Of course, he was the starting point guard in the playoffs all of last season and did very well, particularly against the Detroit Pistons, but it's a new season, kind of a new team. So, I won't rest too much of the blame for this on Craig Hodges' shoulders. It's obvious that the defending world champion Detroit Pistons just are the better team as of right now in that matchup. But it was a great performance in the final 3 quarters by the Pistons, who started off the game shooting only 5 for 20, but went 32 for 52 the rest of the way. That's over 60% shooting in the time period, which was essentially the final 3 quarters of the game. And meanwhile, they held the Bulls to 31% shooting for the game. And if you take away Michael Jordan and his 31 points, the Bulls only shot 15 of 63. That's under 24%, folks. You just can't win a game that way. And it seems, some of the Bulls' assistant coaches, there was much made of them watching Portland Trailblazers film in the locker room before Game 7. Seems that time was wasted for those Bulls assistants. They certainly should have been watching Pistons film instead. So here's some final numbers for that game. First, the visiting Bulls. Michael Jordan led the way with 31 points. The only other double-digit scorer was Horace Grant, who had 10. Horace Grant added 14 rebounds. That was a game high. Jordan led the way with 9 assists. He was the only Chicago Bull to tally more than 2. And for the victorious Detroit Pistons, Isaiah Thomas was the high scorer with 21 points, also the high assist man with 11, and Mark Aguirre led the Pistons in rebounds with 10. And let me, before we move on to Players of the Week and previewing the finals matchup between the Pistons and the Trailblazers, let me mention this wasn't even the best game that the Pistons have played in this series, and they still won easily. The 3-guard lineup that the Pistons run with most of the time, with Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, and Vinnie Johnson off the bench, they barely played together in this game, and Dumars and Vinnie Johnson only combined for 11 points on 4 of 14 shooting. Last night, it was the bench mob of Mark Aguirre and John Sally who really came through in that game. It was Aguirre, who had 15 points and 10 rebounds, and Sally, who had 14 points and 5 blocks. Outstanding performance from those two, and that 3-guard lineup didn't even have to do much damage for the Pistons to, cruise to a relatively easy win. So with that, let's do our KLTB Players of the Week for the Western Conference for leading his team in scoring in Game 5 on Tuesday with 32 points, adding in 10 rebounds, and then, of course, its steely resolve in hitting the 2 game-sealing free throws against the Suns. Clyde Drexler is the West's Player of the Week. And in the East, although his team lost the series, I think you got to give it to Michael Jordan, who I think is the greatest player never to make an NBA Finals. You got to think it's coming one of these years. In the newsletter, I mentioned the following is his competition for the honor of being the greatest player to never make an NBA Finals: Alex English, George Gervin, Bob Lanier, Sidney Moncrief, and Dominique Wilkins. I don't really think any of these people are better than Michael Jordan, to be frank with you. Maybe I'm crazy, but I can see Mike winning championships, multiple championships. And, I don't know that Alex English or Dominique Wilkins at this point in their careers will do that at all. But tell you what, I want everybody, if you have an opinion on this one way or the other, call in to 405-466-7623. That's 405-HoopMad. And let me know what you think. Is Michael Jordan the greatest player never to make an NBA Finals? Or is it somebody else? Could be one of the guys I listed: English, Gervin, Lanier, Moncrief, or Wilkins. Could be somebody else. Let me know what you think. But let's get into this finals matchup. It's very exciting. You've got a team that's overcome a lot in the last couple seasons. You got Portland. Of course, they fired their head coach, Mike Schuler, in the middle of last season. They promoted Rick Adelman from assistant coach to head coach. Adelman has taken the league by storm. He's taken a Portland team that has been ousted in the first round each of the past 4 seasons, all the way to their first NBA Finals since 1977. And they're going against the defending champs, who they need no introduction. Everybody knows who the Detroit Pistons are and what they stand for. So the very first thing I'll say is that both of these teams, as you'd expect in the NBA Finals, they're very, very well coached. But there have been rumblings that Chuck Daly may retire from coaching soon to go into broadcasting, maybe take the Philadelphia 76ers GM job, maybe try to get some money together, try to start an expansion franchise. That's been hot the last few years. We'll see if that's a distraction for Detroit during the finals. Hasn't slowed them down too much, thus far. But on the court, you've got 2 fantastic point guards. You got Terry Porter for Portland, Isaiah Thomas for Detroit. Isaiah's already a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame. The shooting guard position is probably the most competitive in this series. You got Joe Dumars, the reigning Finals MVP, trying to hold off Clyde Drexler, who I believe is the second best shooting guard in the league right now. You got James Edwards versus Kevin Duckworth in the middle. That's an intriguing matchup. I will say, although he's been playing well through that broken hand, I am not sure how effective Kevin Duckworth is going to be in the finals against a Detroit team that is not going to be shy about being rough with him. I'm sure that recently broken hand is, circled at the top of Lambier's scouting report for this series. That's all I'm going to say about that. Now, on the other hand, at the small forward position, you've got an injury on Detroit. Dennis Rodman has an injured ankle, and you can tell that he's hurting. And Jerome Kersey, in the aggregate, probably has been Portland's best player, if not just the best scorer in these playoffs. Is Dennis Rodman going to be able to stop Jerome Kersey? Probably not. And then Lambier versus Buck Williams, and what a contrast, between these two. Lambier, the ultimate stretch forward, facing the basket at 6'11" and not making it look like a mistake. He's launching threes. And then you got Buck Williams, who, like I said, he is loving all this winning after being on the New Jersey Nets for so many years. But, Buck Williams is a classic post-up, jump hook kind of power forward, and these two guys couldn't play more differently than one another, so it's such a fun contrast to see these two go against each other. Now, their benches is where the big difference is going to come. You got Vinnie Johnson, the third guard in the vaunted 3-guard lineup. Then you got Mark Aguirre and John Sally. You basically have 2 starters coming off the bench in Vinnie Johnson and Mark Aguirre. Aguirre can score and rebound like nobody's business, and then you've got a solid rim protector in Sally. I just don't think Portland's bench is going to be able to hold up against them. You've got Danny Young. He's a fine reserve point guard. Wayne Cooper. You got the 2 rookies in Clifford Robinson and Drazen Petrovic, but I just don't think that you can play 2 rookies in the NBA Finals against the Detroit Pistons and win. If you watched the Pistons and the Bulls play last night, why don't you go ask Stacey King and BJ Armstrong what the Pistons do to rookies? I mean, it's just not going to be a good time for them. And Petrovic just can't defend. I think the Pistons are going to win this series. but only by virtue of the differences in bench quality. The starters and the coaching, I mean, it's neck and neck to me. All this is not to say that Portland has a bad bench. Clearly, it's been good enough to get to the NBA Finals, but it's just that this is the Finals. This is the Detroit Pistons. They basically have 7 starters. Yeah. But anyway, I do think that the Pistons are going to repeat as champions. But let me tell you this stat real quick. Isaiah Thomas, of course, he's in a shooting slump. Everybody's been talking about it. He's under 40% from the field since the middle of the Pistons playoff series against the New York Knicks in the second round. Now, last season, in the first 3 rounds, Thomas shot 39% from the field. And then in the finals against the Lakers, he shot nearly 50%. I think history from a year ago is going to repeat itself, and Thomas is going to get himself out of his shooting slump. And I think history from this past couple weeks is going to repeat itself, and the Pistons, just like in this Bulls series, they're going to go back and forth with the Blazers, and then in Game 7 at home in Detroit, win in a blowout, just like what happened, against the Bulls last night. Now, last year, Joe Dumars won the Finals MVP, but I think this year it is going to be Isaiah Thomas's turn. So Pistons in 7, Isaiah Thomas as the Finals MVP. That's my pick. Now, the other thing I wanted to cover today is the new lottery system. I realized that I never really talked about it during the draft lottery coverage a couple weeks ago, and for that, I do apologize. So in the system that we're used to, that's been going on since 1985, every non-playoff team gets entered into the lottery, and they would have an equal chance at getting that first pick. So last year, there were 9 teams who missed the playoffs. They all had a 1 in 9 shot at getting a top pick. It's about 11%. But this year, things are a little different. Instead of just picking a name out of a hat, the odds are stacked heavier towards the teams that lost more games. So, for example, Atlanta and Seattle finished 41 and 41, so they had an extremely long shot at getting the number 1 pick, while the New Jersey Nets had the worst record in the league, so they had the best odds, 17 wins and a 1 in 6 shot at winning it all, which they did. Now, those long odds for Atlanta and Seattle made it even more amazing when Seattle got the second pick, but, that kind of thing can happen. Probably won't, but it can happen. Now, that final draft order after the draft lottery, New Jersey Nets win the first overall pick, Seattle SuperSonics jump up to second. They only had about a 3% chance of doing that. Miami Heat get the third pick, and then it's chalk from then on. Orlando Magic at 4, Charlotte Hornets at 5, Minnesota Timberwolves at 6, Sacramento Kings at 7, LA Clippers at 8, Dallas Mavericks at 9, Golden State Warriors at 10, and the Atlanta Hawks bringing up the rear at the 11th pick. So now let's go to the phones. Let's check the answering machine, 405-466-7623. That's 405-HOOP-MAD. If you're mad about hoops, either in a fun way or an angry way, call in, let us know, ask a question. Even if we don't play your message on the show, I'm going to listen to it anyway. I love hearing from the listeners. You can give me feedback, whatever you want. I'm going to listen to it. And by the way, KLTB's phones and answering machine services are handled by Pili Telecommunications, and yours can be as well. They are offering a great deal to new customers, 2 free cordless phones if you switch to them today. Pili Telecommunications, say hello to the clearest audio in the business. Donna, do you have that voice message pulled up yet? Thank you, Donna. All right, here we go.
Well, howdy there, fellas. This is Mark. I was wondering if you thought that there were any players from the CBA who have a shot at playing in the NBA next season. Thank you, and go Rockets.
Thank you, Mark, for calling in. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. CBA is the Continental Basketball Association, of course. The first player that comes to mind that I think should be in the NBA next season is the CBA scoring champion, Fred Askew. He played for the 76ers a little while ago, but he was in Italy last season and the Albany Patroons this season. He averaged 26.5 points per game this season on, I don't remember the specifics, but it's over 50% shooting. I think there's a place in the league for him for sure. And then second, just up the road in Tulsa, you got Ozell Jones. He's averaging about 12 points, 10 rebounds, 3 blocks per game. Played for the Spurs 5 or 6 years ago. Didn't last, but it's a big man's league. I bet he could soak up some minutes behind Ewing, or, Robert Parrish up in Boston is getting older. Heck, he could even be a third big in Cleveland as an insurance policy for Brad Doherty with that, that foot injury. You never know how big men are going to come back from a foot injury. But, those two off the top of my head are all I can really think of. I don't follow, the CBA too closely. I did just happen to go to that Albany Patroons game in Tulsa earlier this year. But now let's close out today's show with Oklahoma City's favorite segment, Sonics Corner.
It's time for Sonics Corner, KLTB. We love the SuperSonics here in OKC.
Since we're inching closer to the draft and we haven't really talked about it yet, who should the Sonics draft this year with their second overall pick? So they got very lucky and they jumped up with only about a 3% chance to do so with those new lottery odds. But as Bernie Bickerstaff said, that's why people play the lottery. It's to beat the odds. Now, Bernie Bickerstaff, of course, just reassigned from the head coach of the Sonics to a front office position. I'm a little worried that Bernie and Bob Whitsitt, Trader Bob, are gonna trade the pick with Dennis Scott still on the board. I loved that guy at Georgia Tech, and I think him and Dale Ellis together, would instantly make Seattle the best jump shooting team in the league. But realistically, we've got Dale Ellis, we got Xavier McDaniel, we got Derek McKee. I don't think that that's what the need is in Seattle. You got Michael Cage at center. You'd love if he, put the ball in the basket a little more, but that's not who he is. You could certainly use an upgrade over him, but he's fine. There's not a great center prospect in this draft. You've got a good young power forward in Sean Kemp. He's worth spending some time and some resources on. I mentioned Ellis, McDaniel, and McKee, as the wing and forward kind of rotation. You don't really need to replace any of these guys necessarily. So what does that leave? A guard. Here's what the new head coach of the Seattle Sonics, Casey Jones, says. And this, by the way, is from the Seattle paper via the Associated Press. Quote, "We need a lot of help out there at the point, and like any other team, a center, someone like Akeem Olajuwon of the Houston Rockets. But in today's game, how much advantage will a big guard have in posting up on a smaller guard? I envision a point guard who is good at running a break and good at being a coach on the floor." So I will say that although Nate McMillan, no disrespect to him at all, he was a good option at the point guard position this year. The Sonics probably need a true point guard in place and let Nate focus more on defense because although he's, a good distributor, he averaged a lot of assists this year, he can't score. But who can score? Gary Payton from Oregon State, almost 26 points per game this season, a heck of a defender himself, almost 3.5 steals this past year. They'd be the best defensive backcourt in the league by a mile once they mature a little bit together. I think if they decide to keep the pick, they've got to go with Gary Payton here. I could be wrong. Bernie Bickerstaff says that they've got their ears to the ground, but I envision that they're going to keep the pick, be grateful for the stroke of luck, and pick up Payton. Now, I think in this situation, Dana Barros is kind of the odd man out. You'd hate to just push aside a player that you just spent a first-round pick on a year ago just because you got another high pick this year, especially when Barros isn't a bad player. He was pretty good for a rookie, but you just have to take every opportunity that you have in this league. I think that they go with Payton, and I hope they will. And if anybody can figure out how to manage a kind of situation, between Barros and Payton, I think it's Casey Jones with all the championships he's won, all the locker rooms he's been in. But, I know a couple weeks ago I had like a 20-minute Sonics Corner about Casey Jones, so I won't belabor that point. But Casey's the man. Y'all know how happy I am to have Casey running the show in Seattle. No disrespect whatsoever to Bernie Bickerstaff, but it's Casey Jones. But with that, I'm going to say goodbye for today. Be sure to tune in to KLTB Radio every day. There's something for everybody. We've got pro and college hoops, pro and college football, OKC 89ers coverage, and tonight on this very station, the Texas Rangers at home against the California Angels, trying to split the series 2-2. Kevin Brown is your starting pitcher for the Rangers tonight. And we will catch up on the first 3 games of this NBA Finals series next Monday morning at 8 a.m. Thank you for listening, and up next, kick back, relax, and enjoy some Billboard Top 40 hits. Bye now. Alrighty, so there you have it. That's the pilot. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, just let me know what your thoughts are on that. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. My DMs are open on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter at BackfiredNBAPod. You could call and leave a voicemail. I think you can text that number too. That 405-466-7623, 405 Hoop Mad. But yeah, please just let me know what you think, and we will talk again in a couple weeks. Be sure to check out the newsletter as well. And yeah, that'll do it. Bye now. Have a good one.